At 2 a.m., my brother yanked me out of bed and tossed me into the yard, shouting that I wasn't real family. My parents just stood at the window, watching. I crawled back inside, and what happened next made the whole neighborhood call the cops. My name is Noah. I'm 23 now, and I've learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the very people who should protect you are the ones who stand by and watch you drown. Growing up, our family looked normal, suburban, picture perfect. 2 parents, a younger brother, Ethan, and me, the older one. From the outside, we were just an ordinary family. My dad worked long hours, my mom was always home, and Ethan, he was the golden child. Everyone adored him. I was the quiet one, the one who loved books and music, the one who never caused trouble. Or at least, that's how people labeled me. But inside our home, it was a completely different story. Ethan could do no wrong. Every tiny accomplishment he had, no matter how small, was celebrated like he'd just cured a disease. He scored a goal in soccer? My parents posted about it online for days. I aced an exam? Barely a nod. If Ethan forgot his chores, it was always, he's tired. He has a lot going on. If I forgot, I was lazy, ungrateful, irresponsible. At first, I brushed it off. Sibling rivalry, right? Just how families were. But as I got older, the truth became painfully clear. This wasn't rivalry. It was blatant favoritism, and it was crushing me. By high school, Ethan had perfected being cruel when no one was watching. He'd shove me into walls, mock me in front of his friends, call me names like the spare or the accident. If I ever tried to tell my parents, they'd just shake their heads and laugh. Boys will be boys, my dad would chuckle. Or worse, you probably provoked him. My mom would just sigh and say, "Don't make waves, Noah." I learned quickly, if it involved Ethan, I was on my own. There was no backup. No one. The night everything shifted, the night that burned a line in my memory, it started like any other. I'd worked late on some freelance stuff, finally crawled into bed around 2 a.m. Then, boom. Hands grabbed me. Rough hands. Before I was even fully awake, I was yanked out of bed, my arm twisted. "Get up, loser." Ethan's voice hissed in the dark. I stumbled, half asleep, heart hammering, trying to understand what was even happening. He dragged me toward the back door, his grip bruising. "What are you doing?" I croaked, my voice thick with sleep and fear. "You don't belong here," he spat, shoving me forward. "You're not real family. Mom and Dad don't even want you here. You're just taking up space." Those words, they cut deeper than any bruise. He flung open the door and shoved me outside into the cold, damp yard. I tripped over the steps, hitting the wet grass, the shock jolting me wide awake. I looked up in utter disbelief as Ethan loomed in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the kitchen light. And then I saw them. My parents. Standing at the window. Just watching. They didn't move. They didn't say a word. They just watched as their younger son threw me outside like trash. "Ethan, stop." I called out, my voice cracking, hoping. Just hoping maybe they'd finally step in. Maybe they'd finally defend me. But my father just folded his arms. My mother turned her face away. Ethan sneered, his voice dripping with triumph. "See? They don't care. They never did. You're nothing here, Noah. Nothing." He slammed the door shut, the lock clicking into place. I sat there in the wet grass, shivering, staring up at their darkened window. And then it started. A flicker of anger in my chest. It grew hotter with each ragged breath. My whole life, I'd been patient. I'd swallowed their words, their blatant favoritism, their deafening silence. But in that moment, as I crawled back toward the door, my hands shaking and knees damp with dirt, something inside me broke. And something new, something dangerous, began to take its place. I managed to push the door open. Ethan had left it unlocked after all. I stumbled back inside, dripping with cold and humiliation. The house was silent now, but it hummed with a strange, expectant energy, like it was waiting. My parents' door was shut, the light under it dimmed. Ethan's faint laughter echoed from upstairs. My mind raced, my heart pounded. And then, before I even fully understood it, something happened, something that would change everything. Something loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood and send people dialing 911. But I'll get to that. First, you need to understand just how deep the cracks in this family ran. What came next wasn't just an accident. It was the culmination of years of silence, cruelty, and betrayal, all boiling over in one single, explosive night. When I got back inside that night, the house felt colder than the yard I'd just been thrown into. My clothes clung damply to my skin, and every creak of the wooden floor felt like a reminder that I didn't belong. Upstairs, Ethan's muffled laughter bled through the walls. He was probably gloating. My parents' door remained shut, not a sound from behind it. Their silence was deliberate. Heavy. Chosen. I went in my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. That's when the realization hit. This wasn't an isolated incident. That moment in the yard was just the boiling point. Everything leading up to it had been building for years. I'd been conditioned to be the shadow. The one who wasn't celebrated, wasn't defended, wasn't truly seen. The more I thought about it, the more I remembered all the little things that had chipped away at me. Holidays, for instance. Every Christmas morning, Ethan would have piles of presents, brand new clothes, the latest gaming consoles, expensive sneakers. My pile was always smaller. When I asked why, Mom would say, "Well, Ethan's still growing, he needs things." Dad would shrug, "You're older. You don't need toys." But it wasn't about toys. It was about what those gifts represented. Every smile on Ethan's face was reflected in my parents' approval, while my own excitement was muted, brushed off like it was embarrassing. Even birthdays weren't mine. One year, I turned 16, a huge milestone. No party, not even a dinner out. But when Ethan turned 13, they rented out a hall, invited the entire neighborhood. It's his bar mitzvah of becoming a teenager. Dad joked, even though we weren't religious. They made it sound like Ethan was royalty ascending a throne, and I was just there to help set up balloons. Then there was school. I worked my tail off, studying late, desperate to carve out a future that might get me out of that house. I brought home straight A's, and my mom would glance at my report card and say, "Good. That's what we expect from you." When Ethan barely scraped by with C's, he got a celebratory pizza night. He tried his best. Dad would beam. I tried not to let it get to me, but every moment like that left me feeling smaller, invisible. Like my effort was only valuable if it made Ethan look good in comparison. And Ethan knew it. He wielded that favoritism like a weapon. If I didn't lend him my things, he'd run to Mom and say I was being selfish. She'd scold me, telling me I needed to learn to share. If I tried to defend myself, Ethan would twist the story, claim I'd hit him or raised my voice. He was a master at playing the victim, and I was so tired of always being painted the villain. My parents never questioned his word. To them, his version was gospel. One of the worst moments came when I got my first job at a local coffee shop. I was so proud, earning my own money, finally having something that was mine. I saved for weeks to buy a used laptop, something I desperately needed for school and freelance projects. But within days, Ethan was using it, downloading games, leaving crumbs between the keys. When I tried to stop him, he just smirked. Mom said I should. We're family. We share. And when I complained to her, she sided with him. He's younger, Noah. Be the bigger person. Being the bigger person became the mantra of my life. No matter what Ethan did, I was always supposed to absorb it. If he lied, I had to swallow it. If he pushed, I had to stand still. If he stole, I had to let it go. And all the while, my parents praised him for his confidence and charm. The real breaking point, before that night, came at dinner about a month earlier. We were all at the table when Dad casually mentioned he was thinking of updating the will. Ethan smirked across the table. "Well, obviously I'm getting the house. You'll probably get like Dad's old golf clubs or something." I laughed bitterly. "Why would you say that?" And before Ethan could even answer, Mom chimed in with a smile. "Well, it makes sense. You're independent. You'll figure things out. Ethan, he'll need more support." That sentence haunted me. It wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was the confirmation of everything I'd always felt. They saw me as expendable, a placeholder. Someone who didn't need their care, didn't deserve their protection, wasn't entitled to anything. Not even belonging. So, when Ethan dragged me into the yard that night, when my parents stared out the window and did nothing, it wasn't shocking. It was consistent. It was exactly who they had always been. And yet, something about seeing it so clearly, so raw and undeniable, set off a storm inside me. I sat there on my bed that night, soaked and trembling, my mind racing through every memory, every dismissal, every moment they had chosen him over me. My fists clenched. My jaw ached from grinding my teeth. For the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt angry. Angry enough that I couldn't sleep. Angry enough that I started to think, really think, about what I was going to do next. And that's when the night turned. That's when things shifted from silence to chaos. Because what happened in the hours after would shake the foundation of that house, wake the neighbors, and bring the police storming in. But before I get to that moment, you have to understand, this wasn't just about one cruel night. This was years of favoritism, manipulation, and silence finally snapping. And when it snapped loud enough for the entire block to hear. That night should have ended when I crawled back into bed. But of course, it didn't. Sleep was impossible. My chest felt like a drum, someone beating it from the inside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face twisted in that smug grin, the door slamming, my parents staring like strangers. I kept replaying it, searching. Maybe if I thought about it enough, I could find some sign of hesitation in them. Some flicker that meant they cared, but were just too frozen to act. But there was nothing. Their silence had been deliberate. That truth gnawed at me until my insides felt hollow. I got up around dawn, still in the same damp shirt, and headed to the kitchen for water. The house was quiet except for the sound of clinking dishes. My mom was at the sink, humming softly, as if nothing had happened. She glanced over her shoulder when I walked in. "Morning," she said, casually, like I hadn't just been thrown into the yard 6 hours earlier. I froze in the doorway. Asterisk, that's it? "Morning," asterisk, my voice cracked, sharp, louder than I intended. "Morning." She frowned like I was being unreasonable. "Don't start, Noah. You know your brother gets hot-headed sometimes. You should have just stayed quiet instead of provoking him." The words hit like ice water. Provoking him? He dragged me out of bed. He threw me outside in the middle of the night, and you two just watched. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her until she saw me. But instead, I just stood there, gripping the counter, breathing hard through my nose. That's when Ethan strolled in, hair messy from sleep, yawning like he'd had the best night of rest in his life. He grabbed the orange juice and smirked when he saw me. "Oh, look. The stray cat crawled back in," he said. I snapped. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan. One day what?" He poured himself a glass of juice, leaning against the counter, sipping leisurely. "You'll finally tell on me? Go ahead. They won't believe you. They never do." And he was right. My mom shot me a warning look. "Don't start a fight first thing in the morning, Noah." That was the moment I realized Ethan wasn't just cruel. He was protected. He knew it. He wore their favoritism like armor, knowing no matter what he did, I would be blamed. It was the unspoken family rule, carved into every interaction. Ethan was the chosen one, and I was the scapegoat. But the real betrayal, the true fracture, came later that week. I had been saving money from my coffee shop job and freelance work for months. Every spare dollar went into a small savings account I'd opened quietly, without telling anyone. It wasn't much, just over $1,500. But it was mine. It was proof that I wasn't completely powerless. That maybe, just maybe, I could build a way out. One afternoon, I checked my account. I froze. The balance was nearly empty. $137. My stomach dropped. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the transaction history. And there it was. Multiple transfers. All to my parents' joint account. I couldn't breathe. I stormed into the living room where Dad was watching TV. "Where's my money?" I demanded, holding up my phone. He barely looked away from the screen. "Relax. We moved it." You what?" My voice cracked. "That was my savings. Months of work. You can't just take it." Dad sighed, as if I were the annoying child. "Don't be dramatic. We needed it for Ethan. He's joining a travel soccer team, and the fees aren't cheap. You don't need the money right now. He does. I stared at him, my chest tight. You stole from me. You just took it? It's not stealing, Mom chimed in from the doorway. It's family money. You're part of this household. You don't get to act like you're separate. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. All those late nights working. Every shift I dragged myself through, just to squirrel away a little independence. It was gone. Not only gone, but handed directly to the very brother who had thrown me outside while they watched. And Ethan knew. That night at dinner, he leaned over, smirking, and whispered, "Thanks for sponsoring my season, loser." Something inside me fractured. Not the usual quiet hurt I'd carried for years. Not the slow ache of being overlooked. This was different. This was betrayal so sharp it felt like a knife to the spine. My parents hadn't just ignored me. They had actively chosen him, drained me, left me with nothing. And Ethan had laughed in my face for it. That night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, I felt something shift. The grief, the humiliation, it hardened. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless. I felt clarity. They had shown me exactly where I stood. Not as a son. Not as a brother. Not even as a person with rights. Just a resource to be used. And once I saw that truth, I knew I couldn't go back to swallowing it. Something had to change. The problem was, I didn't know yet that the change was already on its way, and it was coming fast. Because a storm was brewing in that house. One louder and more destructive than anyone could have expected. And when it hit, it wouldn't just rattle us. It would shake the entire neighborhood awake. Rock bottom didn't come with one loud crash. It came slowly, like a tide creeping higher each day until I realized I was already drowning. After the money was gone, something inside me stopped fighting openly. For the first time, I didn't argue back when Ethan mocked me or when my parents dismissed me. I felt hollow, like I'd been carved out from the inside. Every morning, I'd get up, go to work at the coffee shop, come home, and exist in silence. Ethan noticed, of course. He thrived on my reactions, and when I stopped giving them to him, he only pushed harder. He'd knock on my bedroom door at night just to wake me, laughing when I opened it. He'd leave my clothes in the yard after pulling them from the hamper. Once, he even accidentally spilled soda all over the laptop I'd saved for, the one I'd bought before they raided my account. My mom just sighed. Accidents happen, Noah. Don't make it a big deal. But the worst part wasn't Ethan's cruelty. It was the emptiness at the dinner table. The way my parents leaned in when he spoke, nodding along, asking questions, smiling. When I tried to join the conversation, they cut me off. If I mentioned work, Dad would grunt. If I brought up school, Mom would glance at Ethan and change the subject. It was as if I were a ghost in my own home, visible only when they needed something from me. One night stands out more than the rest. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., and I was at the kitchen table, homework spread out. Finals were coming up, and I was desperate to hold on to some kind of achievement, something that was still mine. Ethan walked in, grabbed my notebook, and started flipping through the pages. "Wow," he said mockingly. "You really think this matters? You're wasting your time. You'll never be anything. Dad says you're just book smart. No real-life skills. You'll be working at that coffee shop forever." I snatched the notebook back, my hands shaking. At least I'm doing something. At least I'm trying. He leaned close, smirking. Trying doesn't mean anything if nobody cares. And that's when I saw it. My parents standing in the doorway. They had heard every word. For a second, I thought, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally say something. Finally stand up for me. But Dad just chuckled. "Ethan's got a point. Don't waste your life, Noah." Mom smiled faintly and nodded. I can't explain how that felt. It was like the floor gave out beneath me, and I kept falling long after I hit the ground. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was confirmation that they believed him. That they saw me as nothing more than a placeholder, someone who would never measure up to their golden child. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window in my room, staring out at the streetlights, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood. Somewhere out there, kids were sneaking back home after hanging out with friends. Somewhere out there, families were laughing over late-night snacks. Somewhere out there, people actually cared for each other. And I realized I was never going to have that in this house. Not as long as I kept trying to earn something they had already decided I didn't deserve. So, I started planning. Not revenge, not yet, but escape. Quietly. Carefully. I picked up more shifts at work without telling them, using cash tips to start a new stash of savings. I volunteered to cover closing shifts so I could stay out later, breathe longer before coming back into that house. I started researching cheap apartments, looking at rental boards online when no one was watching. Of course, it wasn't easy. Ethan snooped constantly, and my parents had a habit of borrowing my things. So I got creative. I hid cash inside old notebooks he'd never touch. I told my parents I was staying late at the library when really I was meeting with a friend who'd agreed to help me find housing once I was ready. But every time I made progress, something dragged me back down. One evening, I came home to find Ethan sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone. He'd guessed my passcode, my birthday, and was grinning as he waved it at me. Looking for apartments, huh? Where are you going to go, loser? You can't afford anything. You'll come crawling back. My stomach twisted. Panic set in. Give it back, I said, my voice low. He laughed, tossing it onto the bed. Relax. I'm not telling them yet. But maybe I will, if you annoy me. That threat hung over me like a guillotine. From then on, I was more careful, but also more paranoid. It felt like every step I took toward freedom was one Ethan could snatch away with a smirk. And yet, the more they pushed me down, the more determined I became. I worked harder, saved more, kept my head down. On the outside, I was quiet, compliant, beaten down. But on the inside, something was building. A slow fire, fed by every insult, every theft, every betrayal. What I didn't know then was that all of this, the stolen money, the broken trust, the years of silence, was pushing me toward a breaking point. And soon that point would come. Not in silence this time, but in a way that shook the walls, startled the neighbors, and drew flashing red and blue lights down our quiet suburban street. It's strange how sometimes the lowest point can quietly become the turning point. After weeks of feeling like a ghost in my own home, something shifted. Not with my family, they were as cruel and dismissive as ever. But with me. I stopped looking at their approval like a prize I could win. Instead, I started to treat my situation like a test. If no one in that house would value me, then I'd find value somewhere else. The first real step upward came through work. I had been clinging to that coffee shop job as my lifeline. At first, it was just a way to make money, to buy myself scraps of freedom. But then one evening, covering a closing shift, the manager pulled me aside. "Noah," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're reliable. You show up on time, you don't complain, and you don't slack off. I could use someone like you to help train the new hires." It wasn't much, just a bump in responsibility, a slight increase in hours. But to me, it felt huge. Someone trusted me. Someone recognized my effort without comparing me to Ethan or brushing me off. I took that little promotion seriously, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I had a future. With the extra hours, my cash stash started to grow again. I didn't dare open another bank account in my name. My parents had already proven they'd dip their hands into it without hesitation. Instead, I started using prepaid cards I could load in small amounts and tuck into hidden places. My favorite spot? Inside an old cereal box in my closet, one Ethan would never bother touching because it was boring brand flakes. The money wasn't the only thing growing, though. I had been doing little freelance projects online, graphic design, essay editing, things like that. And one of my clients reached out with bigger work. "You've got talent," she said over the phone. "If you want, I can connect you with others who need the same." I said yes immediately. Within a month, I was balancing my coffee shop shifts with steady freelance income. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Ethan was slipping. His travel soccer team, the one funded partly by my stolen savings, wasn't going well. He complained constantly about the coach, skipped practices, and got benched more than once. But of course, my parents coddled him. "He just needs time," Mom would say, or "the coach doesn't appreciate his talent." I watched it all unfold with a quiet kind of satisfaction. For the first time, I could see the cracks forming in the golden boy image. At school, too, things began to shift. I kept my head down, focused on my grades, and one of my teachers nominated me for a scholarship program. I didn't tell my family. I didn't want to give them the chance to sabotage it. But privately, I worked hard on the application, pouring myself into essays late at night when the house was quiet. It felt like building a bridge out of stone, one piece at a time, toward a place where they couldn't reach me. Even small victories began to feel like triumphs. When Ethan mocked me for bringing home leftover pastries from the coffee shop, I ignored him and shared them with a couple of friends instead. When Dad scoffed at my freelance work, "That's not real money, Noah. Get serious." I bit my tongue and let him think I was wasting time, all while my client list doubled. Their words stopped cutting as deep because I had proof, real proof, that I wasn't who they said I was. The strangest part was how my silence began to unnerve them. Ethan especially seemed unsettled. He was used to me snapping back, to me defending myself and giving him something to push against. But when I stopped giving him that satisfaction, he grew restless. He'd try harder, throwing my things around, making snide comments at dinner, but when I didn't react, his smirk faltered. I caught him watching me sometimes, confusion flickering in his eyes. It was as if he couldn't understand why his usual tricks weren't working anymore. My parents noticed, too. One night, Mom asked, "Why are you so quiet these days?" I just shrugged, muttering, nothing to say. But inside, I was smiling. For the first time, the power dynamic was shifting, even if they didn't realize it yet. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. And slowly, opportunities began stacking up. The scholarship program called me for an interview. My freelance earnings were enough to cover a few months of rent if I could find the right place. I even started looking at used cars, imagining the day I could drive away from that house for good. But the most important change wasn't money or recognition. It was me. The fire that had been smothered for years by their favoritism and cruelty had finally sparked again. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. Quietly. Carefully. But with purpose. I didn't tell them any of it, of course. Let them think I was still the invisible son, the one they could overlook, the one Ethan could taunt without consequence. Because the truth was, I had something they couldn't see. Momentum. And momentum, once it starts rolling, is almost impossible to stop. What I didn't realize was how quickly that momentum would collide with their world. Because soon, all the pieces I had been quietly setting into place would line up, and one small push would send everything crashing down. Not just for Ethan, but for my parents, too. And when it happened, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be loud enough that the entire neighborhood would hear. The setup for what was coming didn't feel like a dramatic discovery at first. It crept up on me slowly, the way a storm gathers before the sky cracks open. All those little steps I'd been taking, working extra hours, freelancing, applying for scholarships, were pieces of a bigger puzzle I didn't even realize I was building until I suddenly saw how they all connected. It started with a scholarship interview. I remember sitting in a quiet classroom after school, my palms sweating as the panel of teachers and local sponsors asked me questions. I told them about my work ethic, about the coffee shop, about juggling responsibilities while still managing good grades. I didn't talk about my family. I didn't want pity. I wanted them to see my determination. When I walked out, I didn't know if I'd impress them, but I felt lighter. For once, I'd been able to speak about myself without being overshadowed by Ethan or dismissed by my parents. A week later, an envelope came in the mail, addressed to me. My mom tossed it onto the counter without looking twice. I tore it open in my room and nearly dropped it when I read the words, "Congratulations, you've been selected." The scholarship wasn't a full ride, but it was substantial, enough to cover tuition for the first year of college, something I had secretly worried I'd never be able to afford. I didn't tell anyone. Not Ethan, not my parents. I tucked the letter into the back of my desk drawer, locking it away like treasure. Because I knew if they found out, they'd find a way to twist it. Either claim it was family money again, or worse, belittle it so much that it lost its shine. No, this one was mine. And it gave me something even more valuable than money, leverage. I had proof now that I wasn't the nothing they painted me to be. Around the same time, my freelance work took an unexpected turn. One of my clients, a small business owner, liked my design so much that he offered me a steady contract. It wasn't huge, but it was consistent. He even said, if you ever want to turn this into a career, you could. You've got the skill for it. Hearing that lit something inside me. For so long, I'd been told by my family that I had no real life skills, that I'd amount to nothing beyond that coffee shop. But here was someone outside of that toxic circle telling me I had worth. The money started stacking faster than I expected. Between the coffee shop, the freelance work, and now the scholarship, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building an exit plan. I could see the outlines of it. A small apartment, maybe even a used car to get around, and a future where Ethan's voice was just a faint echo in my memory. But the real setup, the part that would eventually turn everything upside down, came one night when I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. It was late, and I was coming home from a closing shift. The lights were still on in the living room, and I paused by the stairs when I heard my parents talking. Their voices were low, serious. "He's not focused," my dad was saying. "The coach already called me twice. If Ethan doesn't shape up, he'll lose his spot on the team." My mom's voice was tight. "We've already invested so much money. The travel fees, the gear, it's too late to pull him out now. He has to make it work. If he doesn't, how will it look? What will people say?" I stood frozen on the steps, listening as they went back and forth. And then I heard something that made my blood run cold. "Maybe Noah can cover the rest. He's been working so much lately. He can contribute. He should contribute." My dad grunted in agreement. "It's all family money in the end. He doesn't need much for himself." I gripped the railing until my knuckles turned white. There it was again. That assumption that whatever I earned, whatever I built, belonged to them. To Ethan. I wasn't a person with goals or needs. I was a resource to be mined until there was nothing left. But this time, instead of despair, I felt something sharper, clarity. They were showing me their playbook. They were so confident in their favoritism, so sure of my silence, that they didn't even bother to hide it. And in that moment, I realized something important. If they saw me as a resource, then I could turn that expectation against them. I went upstairs quietly, heart pounding, my mind racing. That conversation replayed over and over in my head. And the more I thought about it, the more a plan began to form. They expected me to keep giving, to keep sacrificing, to keep being invisible. But what if I didn't? What if I took everything I'd been building, the scholarship, the savings, the freelance work, and used it in a way they'd never see coming? It was the first time I thought about revenge, not just escape. Not loud, reckless revenge, but something quiet, calculated, like the way they had slowly drained me over the years. I would take what I had learned in silence, in invisibility, and use it as leverage. And when the moment came, when their entire world depended on me in a way they didn't expect, I would be ready. The funny thing about rock bottom is that once you've been there, you stop being afraid of losing. That gave me power. That gave me freedom. And as I lay awake that night, listening to Ethan snoring down the hall, I felt the momentum building again. What none of us knew yet, not me, not Ethan, not my parents, was how quickly everything was going to collide. And when it did, it wouldn't just be a family squabble. It would be public, loud, messy, the kind of chaos that neighbors whisper about for years. Revenge didn't come in a single dramatic explosion. It came in stages. Carefully. Quietly. The way I'd been forced to live for years. And maybe that's what made it so effective. I didn't storm into the living room one night screaming. I didn't shove evidence in their faces. No. I played their game. Silence, patience, precision, until the moment was right. The first step was simple. Stop being their resource. For months, they had assumed my money, my time, my work belonged to Ethan's dreams. I flipped that assumption without warning. At the coffee shop, I started routing my paychecks onto those prepaid cards instead of the shared bank account they monitored. The first time, Dad asked casually, "How much did you bring in this week?" "We need to cover Ethan's tournament fee." I shrugged. "Oh, ours got cut." He didn't question it, just sighed and grumbled about bad management. Ethan, of course, noticed the shift. "Why aren't you giving me rides anymore?" he sneered one morning when I refused to chauffeur him to practice. "I'm working later now," I said flatly. "Can't." He shoved me against the wall, but I didn't rise to it. I just stared back. Calm. Steady. Unflinching. It rattled him more than if I'd fought back. The real blow, though, came with the scholarship. Remember how my parents had been banking on me to fund Ethan's career? I let them believe I was still broke, still stuck in place. But behind the scenes, I was meeting with the scholarship committee, finalizing my acceptance, and preparing my exit. I knew that when it came out, the contrast would be brutal. Ethan, failing on the field, costing them money, while I, the spare, was being given opportunities they never thought I deserved. But I wasn't content with just leaving. No, I wanted them to feel it, to taste for once what it was like to be powerless. That chance came sooner than I expected. One Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of shouting downstairs. Ethan had been benched again, and the coach had called my dad, saying if Ethan didn't shape up, he'd be off the team completely. My parents were furious. Not at Ethan, but at the coach, at the system, at anyone they could blame. By the time I walked into the kitchen, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Dad turned to me, his jaw tight. "Noah, you need to cover the new fees. If Ethan's going to prove himself, he needs to attend the extra training camp. It's $800. I blinked at him slowly. "I don't have it." His voice rose. "Don't lie to me. You've been working nonstop. Where's the money going?" "Rent," I said, evenly. The word hit the room like a dropped glass. My mom froze, spatula still in hand. "Rent? What rent?" "I'm moving out," I said, calm, steady. "End of the month." Ethan laughed, sharp and cruel. "You? Move out? With what money?" "Don't make me laugh." I didn't look at him. I pulled the scholarship letter from my backpack and slid it across the table to my parents. "With this, tuition's covered. Between work and freelancing, I'll cover the rest. I don't need anything from you." The silence was electric. My mom's hand shook as she picked up the letter. Dad's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. And Ethan's smirk faltered for the first time in years. "You," he stammered, pointing at me. "You can't just leave. Who's going to? Who's going to pay for your soccer?" I cut him off, my voice sharp now. "Not me. Not anymore. You're on your own." The rage that flickered across his face was almost satisfying enough. Almost. But the real satisfaction came when Dad slammed his fist on the table. "You're abandoning your family," he barked. I leaned forward, meeting his glare without flinching. "No. You abandoned me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away." The argument exploded from there. Ethan shouting, my mom pleading, my dad accusing. But I stayed calm, collected, every word measured. Years of being silenced had taught me how to control my tone, how to let silence stretch until it was unbearable. And that silence made my words hit harder. By the time I walked out of the kitchen, letter tucked back into my bag, I knew I had shifted the power dynamic completely. For once, they couldn't use me. They couldn't drain me. And worse for them, they knew I was slipping out of their control. But the revenge wasn't finished. Because what happened next wasn't just about me leaving. It was about the house itself. The neighborhood. The reputation they clung to so desperately. And when that final piece fell into place, it wouldn't just be my family hearing it. It would be everyone within earshot. The fallout began the night before I was set to move out. I had kept my plan quiet, folding clothes into boxes after late shifts, sneaking bags into my friend's car bit by bit. By then, I had enough saved to cover a small studio apartment, and the scholarship gave me the security I needed. Everything was set. But Ethan, as always, couldn't let things end quietly. I was taping up the last box when he barged into my room without knocking. His face was red, his eyes wild. "You're not going anywhere," he snapped. "Mom and Dad said, this is your home. You can't just walk out." I didn't even look up. "Watch me." That set him off. He lunged, grabbing the box out of my hands, tearing it open, scattering my clothes across the floor. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can just leave and make me look like an idiot?" I stood slowly, keeping my voice calm. You don't need my help to look like an idiot, Ethan. You've managed that all on your own. His face twisted with rage. Before I could step back, he shoved me hard against the wall. My head hit the plaster with a dull thud. For a moment, stars danced in my vision. But when I blinked them away, I saw something else. My parents, standing in the doorway, watching, just like they had that night when he dragged me into the yard. Only this time, I didn't crawl. I pushed Ethan off me with a force that surprised even myself. "Touch me again," I said, my voice low, steady, and you'll regret it. He laughed, but it was shaky, unconvincing. "What are you going to do? Call the cops? They'll believe me, not you. They always do." That's when I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "No," I said simply, "because I already recorded everything." His smirk vanished. I had been careful for weeks. Every insult, every shove, every demand for money. I had recordings, screenshots, even copies of the bank transfers where my savings had mysteriously moved into their account. I'd kept them hidden, waiting for the moment I might need them. And now, standing there in that suffocating room, I knew it was time. I dialed. When the knock came at the front door 20 minutes later, the sound echoed through the entire house. Red and blue lights flashed through the curtains. The neighbors peeked from porches and windows as 2 officers stepped inside. Ethan's bravado crumbled instantly. He stammered, tried to twist the story, but I played the recordings aloud. His voice, mocking, cruel, filled the living room while the officers' faces hardened. My parents tried to intervene, voices overlapping, but the cops shut them down. "You let this happen," one of them demanded. "You stood by while your son was assaulted." For once, their silence wasn't protection. It was condemnation. The officers didn't care about golden children or family favoritism. They cared about evidence, and I had plenty. Ethan was handcuffed right there in front of our neighbors, his protests drowned out by the clink of metal. My parents stood frozen, pale, and trembling, their perfect family image shattering in the glow of police lights. Whispers spread across the street, phones lifted to record, the story already weaving itself into neighborhood gossip. As they led Ethan out, he turned his head, eyes blazing with hatred. "You ruined me," he spat. I met his glare, my voice calm. "No, Ethan. You ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for you." The officers nodded at me, one of them muttering, "You did the right thing." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I didn't wait around for the rest. I grabbed my last box, stepped past my parents' stunned faces, and walked out into the cool night. The air felt different. Lighter. Sharper. Behind me, the flashing lights bathed the house I'd grown up in, a place that had never truly been home, in colors that looked almost like fire. Neighbors stared, some whispering, some nodding at me with something like respect. I didn't care. I was done living for their approval or anyone else's. As I slid into my friend's car, box on my lap, I glanced back one last time. My parents were standing on the porch, small and powerless, watching as their golden son was driven away in the back of a squad car. For years, they had told me I was nothing. But in that moment, with the neighborhood awake, the police lights flashing and their world collapsing, I realized the truth. I had been their scapegoat, their shadow, their expendable one. But now I was free. And they would never forget the night they lost everything because the son they ignored finally stood up.